computer.
Hmm.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends.
Well done.
Crapper. Now today, against all the odds, we have Shaun and Peter. That was unexpected.
Hmm.
Sean Hall, the percussive Potter, and Peter Turner, the musical maitre, and me, Tim Appleton, um, bassist and lecturer at a technical college.
Hmm.
Um, and today we're going to be discussing. We were going to do, what was it? All bums was going to be the
Oh,
theme
but
this week.
yeah,
Uh, we were only going to discuss albums with bums on the cover.
I think we
Uh,
should at some point.
but there wasn't enough of them. So in the end, we decided to go with Brain Salad Surgery by Emerson, Lake and Palmer. You know, classic album. It doesn't have a bum on the cover, uh, but it does have a penis. But maybe we'll come back to that.
Oh,
We'll come back to that later on.
oh my God.
Um, Now today, the idea I think was we were going to expedite the discussion of the album a little bit,
Hmm.
so that we're not here all night. But we'll see whether that plan works. Um, so I think we'll start sort of with the album itself. This is the fifth album, I think, by E.L.P, isn't it? Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Should we call them E.L.P from now on?
Well, it depends what you mean by album, really, because of course you're saying fifth because of Pictures and Exhibition, which isn't a studio album. So it's actually their fourth studio album.
Yes. Are we already in Turner's turntable?
That's a little bit of it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because that's right. Because it's if you include pictures as an exhibition,
Hmm.
which is a sort of an original album, well, so to speak. I mean, it's the cover of a classical piece, but it is live on stage, isn't it?
Yeah.
Supposedly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, well, do you want to give us some basic info, Peter? Start
Yeah,
off.
so this was their fourth studio album, which follows on from Trilogy, and which came out in June 72. This is December 73, so there's a bit of a gap there. And I say a bit of a gap because nowadays, of course, a gap's about 10 years, isn't it, between albums? But back then, a year was a lot. And it reached number two in the United Kingdom and number 11 in the United States. What was interesting about this was they released that they created their own record company in order to do this. This was sort of a new thing at the time, wasn't it? People sort of taking control of the production and recording of it. So a group called Manticore. What they did, they bought an abandoned cinema in Fulham, an old ABC cinema. It sounds great, doesn't it? Like the size of this thing. It sounds wonderful. They converted it into a rehearsal room and the company headquarters, which would later be named Manticore Records. Um,
Do you think they kept the popcorn machine, the popcorn dispenser, handy?
I think there must have been a few things they looked round at and said, "Do we do we want this?" But yeah, anyway, so it helped them to rehearse and record. Now, this was the key thing about it was they had a big space in which they could write, play through everything as if they were playing it live and then say, yeah, that's the bit. And then they could record it, you see. So that it was an all sort of one-stop shop for the whole lot, really, writing, live performance and recording, which, sounds ideal, doesn't it, really? Because, of course, normally what would happen is you'd have everything sorted out, wouldn't you? In the 60s especially, and you'd go into the studio and you'd get a very limited time to lay down the tracks, but everything was sorted and you didn't really have much say in it anyway. It was all done by engineers, wasn't it? So it was recorded from June to September at Olympic and Advision Studios. As all the previous groups' works were, it was produced by Greg Lake. Now, this was news to me. He was actually sort of shoved in production side of things. He sort of had the all-seeing eye over the sound of it. It has a wonderful front cover, which Sean will talk about in a bit, by H.R. Geiger. Is that correct, Sean? Is it Geiger?
I think it's Giga.
but I always thought it was Geiger. I think it is Giger.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I mean,
He's wasn't he Switzerland? Was he in Switzerland?
Yeah,
So it might not be a Germanic surname.
not
It might be French or something.
not many Swiss album cover artists, are there? It's a bit like keyboard players.
yeah, go on. We're never going to talk about his solo albums, though, right? Anyway, yeah. So Peter Sinfield, who we spoke about last time, and with in the Court of the Crimson King, he was involved in the lyrics on this album as well. Two of them, Carnival 9, which you'd expect, but also Benny the Bouncer. Brain Salad Surgery was the first album to have no writing contributions from Palmer. Now I'm saying that, but I know full well that's not the case because when you look at the CD or you look online, it does say that Carl Palmer was involved in the writing. I think there's a bit of a dispute over whether or not he actually was involved in this because I think all the other albums he was involved in the writing. So when it came up to release, what happened was the British newspaper New Musical Express, the NME, released a flexi disc. And this is a bit unusual, but they did used to do this, I think, which was a flexi disc, and on it was samples of each song, just a little bit of each song, and the song Brain Salad Surgery, which oddly didn't appear on this album because it became a B-side later on for Fanfare for the Common Man. Um, yeah, that's Turner's Turntable. There's a lot in there to digest.
Yes.
Lovely. Thanks very much. I mean, yeah, it's interesting that thing you were saying about they wanted their own sort of recording and rehearsal space. I mean, I think it was the dream, wasn't it, at this time of all these bands to be able to just sort of like do everything at once, to be able to write and rehearse and record all in the same space and at the same time without sort of limitations. And you do wonder whether this is sort of this is what people talk about when they talk about rock getting bloated, in the 70s maybe, because like the Beatles had discipline, didn't they? A lot of discipline. They were in Abbey Road in the 60s, and there was a very strict hierarchy. Like they weren't allowed to touch the knobs on the desk and things like that. And it didn't do them any harm, as people say. So I don't know. Yeah, I mean, and you think about this is the second reference to this album, but Exile on Main Street by the Rolling Stones. Where they just move into Keith Richards' house in France because they're dodging tax, basically,
Yeah.
and then they just sit around, taking drugs and writing music and recording, like more than one album's worth of material. Some of which was probably not really. Oh no, let's not. Let's not. Let's not go negative. Let's not go negative in this campaign. I will not go negative. Shaun?
I was going to say, do you think it was really an ulterior motive for Greg Lake so he could get his hands on the ice cream freezer? Yeah, the supply of walls.
Yeah, they went to move it. They said, "Oh yeah, we're just going to move it." No, 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 leave that.
Yeah. Well, brilliant. So, what's funny, by the way, is when you say it reached number 2 in the UK and number 11 in the US. It's funny when you hear that or you read that and you think, yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Anyway, good. Well, I suppose we should go to opinions of the album as such. I think maybe if you like, I'll kick off. I mean, I think that I actually think personally, in a sense, I think this is like the least important bit of this discussion because, like, everyone has different and weird opinions on which album, which song, which track's better and things like that. But just speaking personally, I think I like Pictures at an Exhibition a lot. That's a sort of candidate for my favorite E.L.P. album. But in a way, I think this is more. There's more going on in this album, and I think it is sort of. I would say this is close to a perfect album. It's quite difficult to do a perfect rock album, isn't it? Apparently more difficult than it seems, because they're quite rare beasts, aren't they? Yeah. But I mean, I think this is for me, Pictures at an Exhibition excluded. I think this is probably their best album. I think it works very well as an album. I think it's got a nice balance of material. You know, it's sort of it's programmed properly, I would say. Um, we can maybe nuance some of this, later on. Um, I do think, um, I do think it's not a very good title. And I mean, I don't know how much you want to talk about this, but I think it's an awful title for an album, Brain Salad Surgery. It's kind of disgusting, for my taste. And I didn't realize that it was a euphemism for fellatio, apparently, which I discovered this week.
Oh, right.
I think it's a really tasteless album title, and I think that's not an accident. I think there's something symptomatic about that, and for me, it's sort of emblematic of like a certain certain lapses of taste in Emerson, Lake and Palmer's
Yeah.
in general. I mean, I don't want to be negative. I'm a big, I admire them a lot, but it do seem to be sort of, unlike some of the other bands we've been discussing, to me, there's occasional lapses of taste, and I never really, to do with album titles, maybe album covers as well, possibly. And I wonder whether that's, I never quite know how to take that. I never know whether to take that as a sort of these sort of lapses of taste as sort of like metonymies, like stand-ins for their kind of playful side, because I do think they have a playful side. A lot of it seems very heavy, sort of like serious and almost like pompous E.L.P. But they do have a playful side. But I don't know if these lapses of taste are really sort of representative of that or not. And I'm never really sure. So anyway, that's my sort of take on the album. I mean, Peter, what do you like this album?
I think the lapses of taste thing's interesting because I think Jethro Tull suffer that a little bit, which is you feel like you've been taken for a fool sometimes with them, and then sometimes they're astonishingly good. And this album for me is exactly what you just said, which is I think it has astonishing lack of taste, this album, with exception of a couple of tracks, basically. I'm not a fan of pretty much all of it. I mean, track one, three, and four. I don't like really at all. I think they're a bit tasteless. I think it's like they had to fill space. That's what it feels like with this. There's a lot of space filling and it's pointless, I think.
Mm.
I feel like I'm being patronized in some of this album. And I know full well they're better than this, I think. I think when you say Pictures at an Exhibition is their best album, I think what this proves is that they're better than Pictures at an Exhibition, this album. I think the production's better. I mean, it's a studio album for a start, but I think it shows that they're really making progress, but only in parts on this, really. Yeah, I mean, apart from that, I think it's a concept album, which I've always liked. I've sort of made that clear in the last few episodes. I love a concept, something to follow, as either a story or an idea. There is something happening here. I'm sure we'll talk about later. There's a concept, and I think it sort of runs through almost all of these tracks, actually, whether or not they knew that. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this album, but I am a fan of Carnival 9.
Okay, good. Yeah, I mean, a famous quote, almost a cliche from John Peel, was that E.L.P. were a waste of talent and electricity, right? Now, the thing is that I think that that's not right, but I think that I know what he's trying to say there, which they're very talented, but sometimes they sort of like, if you feel like they're blowing it a little bit. I wonder whether, just before we go to Shaun, Peter, I wonder whether do you like E.L.P. as a band, or
Do you mean do I play them a lot?
no? Because I mean, who knows? I mean, I love things that I never play. I mean, just what's your opinion of them as a band?
There, there's slices of them I like. I mean, there's things I can pick up from them, but I have to say they're not a band I go to very often. It tends to be for me the astonishing sort of ability, their playing ability. I always find really exciting to listen to. I find that first of all, and then I find I really like Greg Lake, and I love his singing, and I think he writes the sweetest of melodies. So that for me is great. I love the ballsiness of the keyboard as well. There's some great sounds on that, and despite all the theatrics and the fireworks, and all the silly stuff which you get on this album as well, he's just a fantastic player. I mean, really amazing player. But they're not a band I go to very often. I just have certain parts of them I like, but I don't have an overarching view on them. Not really. I suppose my overarching view was they're patchy as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Sorry, I'm not expediting this debate very well, am I? Because we've already gone to how we feel about the band. I mean, Sean, what are your feelings about the album?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite an admirable approach, this album. I mean, it's there is a lot going on in it. I find it. I think when I first heard it, I sort of was quite excited by the start of it, and then you sort of get to Carnival 9. That's great, but I sort of fall asleep in the middle of it. I think I'm not particularly, I'm not particularly keen on Benny the Bouncer. I can give that a miss, to be honest. I could have been a B side, really. I don't know how it made it onto the album, but I love Still You Turn Me On. I mean, Greg Lake again. I mean, that sort of fits into his sort of style of songwriting, doesn't it? Like Take a Pebble and stuff like that. And I think, yeah, I mean, it's obviously Carnival 9. It's sort of a sci-fi dystopian epic, isn't it? And Peter Sinfield involved with the lyrics and AI and everything, I don't know. This album, for me, it veers into sort of, I don't know if they've been watching very old Flash Gordon movies or something like that, because I get, there's sort of triumphal marches that sort of pop up into the themes like recurring. You could sort of imagine, I don't know, somewhere on Mars, a colony of Nazis sort of rocking out to this album, but they're playing. I mean, Carl Palmer. I mean, yeah, because I like Trilogy. That's probably this is going to go into the realms of what's better, Fragile or Close to the Edge. But I've got a soft spot for Trilogy. But I do think on this album, I think Carl Palmer's technique is I don't know what he's done, whether he's taken some tablets or something, but it's great on this album. I would say in comparison to Trilogy. I don't know whether it's the way it's been recorded, or is he playing that incredible stainless steel drum kit? I don't know, but he's got a very
maybe was that stuff they gave Joe Biden so he could get through a 5-minute speech. Maybe some of that, whatever that is.
He's quite sort of. I'd sort of liken a bit to Buddy Rich. He's that sort of player. I mean, I'm still more a Bruford fan or a Phil Collins fan, but I do think he's a extremely competent drummer. He's very on the beat. So I mean that's interesting. From a drumming perspective. But yeah, I don't tend to go to this album, but I've really enjoyed forcing myself to listen to it. One quote I was going to mention, it was a bit like the John Peel one, but there was a book, A History of Progressive Rock, by a critic called Paul Stump. I don't know if it's Stump by name, Stump by nature. But anyway, he said Carnival 9 spends most of its time ping-ponging between the inspired and the intolerable. Which
that's good.
Harsh, isn't it? But, there you go.
Peter?
Yeah. I'm sorry. I was just agreeing. I think that's.
Oh, you were agreeing with your finger.
No, I think that's spot on what Stumpy said.
Yeah. Feel free to bring Stumpy back into the debate at any point, Sean.
We'll invite him in.
Interview him. Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right, Sean. It goes sort of radiophonic workshop, doesn't it? Like very, very often, like about every half a minute. And I think really that sort of relates to perhaps something else that we could talk about. But I mean, something that Peter said about it being a concept album. I mean, I would dispute that this is a concept album, but I do think that it's it's perhaps a concept album in the way that In the Court of the Crimson King is a concept album, in the sense that it's very carefully programmed, and in that sense, there's a certain sort of like structure to the whole thing, and it's also perhaps a concept album in the sense like like in the thematic sense, because they're dealing with similar themes over and over again. A lot of it's quite sci-fi-ish. Not in a sort of nerdy way, but like some of it's almost quite sophisticated, actually, I think. But we'll come back to that later in this week's edition of Tim's Pedantry Corner, which will be coming up later on. But I think that it's difficult to resist talking about the individual musicians, isn't it? But I mean, I have to just say I'm a big Keith Emerson fan. I know he's just mad and it's all over the place and it's a lot of it's completely tasteless. But so much of what he did was good that I find it difficult to sort of like discount E.L.P. as a being one of the major prog bands. And of course, I'm a big fan of the Nice. And he was, I think they were one of the most important 60s groups, really, the Nice, and he was, a central part of that. I do wonder sometimes whether E.L.P. really ever came out of the shadow of the Nice, like in the sense whether they ever really took the project of the Nice any further forward, But I mean, bigger egos, perhaps. Yeah. Anyway, shall we go to Hall's Gallery?
Oh yeah.
You got the cover there, Peter?
Cover. Let me just So as we said earlier on on the podcast, it's the cover was painted by one Hans Rudi Giger or Geiger. I always thought it was Geiger, and he was working in Zurich. So it's Zurich, Switzerland, are we? We're Switzerland. Everything's happening in Switzerland. You can see how they became tax exiles, can't you? Everybody was there. So Manticore manager Peter Zumsteg introduced Keith, as we'll call him, to his work. And they went to visit his studio, and he was working on a triptych, 3-piece artwork, entitled 216 Landscape 19, catchy title. And Keith dug it immediately. He thought, wow, this is fantastic. He said it was dark and foreboding, and for me it represented E.L.P. So I think it wasn't the original album. Now it was entitled Whipsome Skull on You, wasn't it? And this is where I bring up in the original painting, there's a member, isn't there? Just below, because we've got a skull, haven't we? We've got a skull, which is obviously like biomechanically, I don't know,
enhanced.
Yeah, and there's a woman's face, which was based on Giger's then girlfriend, Lee Tobler, who was a bit like Toblerone, isn't it? I don't know if she was heir to the fortune, Lee Tobler. He could have painted a Toblerone, actually, couldn't he? Anyway, she appears, she's within the fold-out cover, which is extremely unusual, isn't it, for the time? And she's scarred and appears to be lobotomized, really. So anyway, the original member, shall we say, much to Giger's annoyance, had to be airbrushed out, and I think Giger redid the painting album cover sized, and anyway it was replaced by a shaft of light, but you're still supposed to be able to see the member through the shaft, shall we say. So
I think E.L.P, the symbol for E.L.P is like, it's the balls, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, could well be. Yeah, it's there.
We're going to be censored on YouTube for this kind of discussion.
Never thought of it like that at all. I thought it's really clever though, the way it opens up. It's a sort of gatefold in a slightly different way, isn't it? This I quite like that.
The work that went into that, incredible. Anyway,
do you like it? I mean, do you like it?
It's does kind of fit the album, I've got to admit. I mean, obviously Giger went on to do Alien, didn't he? And all the various characters in that. So it's a style. It's very sort of 1970s sci-fi. It does kind of work still, I guess.
It's definitely an improvement on Trilogy, though, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
Which is an interesting idea, isn't it, for an album cover? But it's not brilliantly done,
It's
Trilogy.
better than Tarkus.
Yeah, God, yeah, they get better.
Yeah, I mean, you can't quibble with his technique. I mean, it's all done by airbrush, so you've got this sort of softened sort of effect, yeah, and an incredible visionary artist, actually. Well, an interesting fact. So it was reissued. Well, it was reissued in 1977. They got rid of the lovely split sleeve that Peter's holding up, which was more's the pity, I suppose. Cutbacks and so on. The austerity version.
Or the oil crisis, wasn't it? That's what they blame everything on at that time.
Paper crisis.
The crisis. So the two original paintings were exhibited at an exhibition in Prague called Giger in Prague, 2005, and somebody bloody nicked them, and they're still missing. So if anyone knows where they are, could they return them, please? But there you go. Yeah. So yeah, that's Hall's Gallery this week.
Right. I think that there's again, if assuming there is a theme here in the album, it does fit the theme. You're right, because the theme is really to do with like sort of human intelligence and artificial intelligence, isn't it? Kind of melding together. I don't know whether that's the theme, the concept that you had in mind, Peter, but that's definitely represented in that cover.
Well, I think there is a concept on 3. I think whether or not they realize this, there is a concept here because Jerusalem is all about, building this great land, isn't it? The Hubert Parry poem, about, oh, did Jesus come here, and has he touched England and, and we can build a great world. That is actually related to Carnival 9. Benny the Bouncer, in a way, I think also fits the theme, which is this awful behavior, isn't it? That song is revolting, basically. It's a horrible example of human nature. And I think those 3 things do kind of go together. Also, the end of Carnival 9 is almost like a reprise of Jerusalem. It feels a little bit like it's a bookend. So I can see why Jerusalem works quite well on this album because it does kind of get a little bit the feel of it. It kind of comes together, I think.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, I've made the same note actually. That bit where it goes,
rejoice.
Da, 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 was it? Da, 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 da. I can't remember the tune actually.
Rejoice. Da, 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 da. That bit.
Da, 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 that bit. Yeah. I think that's like a hymn, isn't it? So it's there is a sort of this is sort of quasi conceptual. But
Man
I don't know
alone born of stone, that bit.
That's that. Man alone born of stone. But I wonder whether that was intentional or not. But you might be right. I mean, it seems like a generous interpretation, but I mean, it might be right. I mean, well, that's probably a good time to get into the tracks, right? So we could start with Jerusalem. Yeah, I mean, actually, Parry wrote the music. I don't know whether I think you misspoke there, Peter, but
William Blake.
It's William Blake. Yeah, I think it's from a prologue to his poem on Milton, I think, and this is a great song, isn't it? I mean, it should have been the national anthem, right? Can we agree on that?
Well, it is WI, isn't it?
Is it?
I think they sing it, don't they? The WI, or is it Mothers Union?
WI.
WI, that's it.
Yeah. The WI singing it doesn't mean that it's
Well, it's the
WI doesn't represent the whole country.
I've had an experience this week because for some reason in my head, I was hearing the lyrics of Jerusalem, and did those feet in ancient times, da 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 da, and I was into sort of transposing it with Stuart Lee's song that he sings, Stuart Lee the comedian. He's talking about evolution and he goes back to the Big Bang and he's sort of saying, how's that song go? Oh, do you remember the lovely times when there was absolutely nothing? There's nothing.
Yeah.
Get those good old times. Oh, there was nothing, and he goes like that. And I, I kept hearing, did those beat in ancient times? No, they didn't. I thought it'd be nice if you could add a little verse. No, because he didn't exist, or he didn't. No, sorry, no, I don't mean that. But he certainly didn't make his way over to Glastonbury or wherever it was. Sorry, not
Yeah.
Glastonbury.
No, it's like a, what do you call it, a rhetorical question, is it? It's based on a rhetorical question, that poem.
Right.
I think, although there is a sort of like mythological idea, isn't there, that, but I think most countries believe that Jesus visited them at some point, and
Well, the Joseph Smith of the Mormon, Joseph Smith of the Mormons sounds like a band. Do you remember
Joseph
him?
Smith and the Mormons.
He played the xylophone. He found the golden tablets, wherever that was, Pennsylvania or something. They were delivered by Jesus, I think, and then he left.
To be fair, I think not much is known about the life of Christ before he, you know, just claimed to be the Son of God and all that
Yeah.
stuff. So maybe,
He
you know,
did carpentry, didn't he? And he,
mm,
made a few tables and
just,
Crosses.
he did in-person deliveries to the edge of the empire, the limits of the empire.
Yeah.
Um,
yeah.
so
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, yeah. I mean, it's. I want to know why they did it. I mean, why are they doing this? Because it's great. It's a brilliant song, beautiful words, wonderful. It should have been the national anthem. It's a great tune. Even the arrangement and the harmonies that they do are really nice. But I don't understand why Keith Emerson always had this penchant for doing covers of things when they already, as Peter was saying earlier, they had three outtakes on this album. The title track, Brain Salad Surgery, and the instrumental, whose name I can never remember, When the Apple Blossom Blows on the Something of Your Mind, or whatever it is. And Tiger in the Spotlight. And I think it's Tiger in the Spotlight, which is on Works 2. I think is a great track. Like, that would have made a brilliant opener. Although now I'm starting to think that maybe Peter's right, that actually that wouldn't have fit the concept. So maybe there is a logic to the madness, as it were. Um, what are your thoughts about this, Shaun?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it really. It's whether they just love the sentiment. I don't know. They wasn't it. It was released as a single, wasn't it? Or it got banned. Like the BBC banned it. That's what it was. Because they thought it was disrespectful. So crazy, really. I mean, it's that era, isn't it? Stop
Disrespectful to whom?
the Church of England, I suppose. These
WI.
WI. Yeah.
Oh, the WI. Yeah. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Don't know. I can't say more than that, really.
No, it's fair enough. I mean, it's just that there's this. This is going to come up maybe in the second track as well. I think there's this thing since the Nice. Keith Emerson had this thing about doing covers all the time, and what he's doing, which is original, I guess, in his mind, is that he's introducing all this new synthesizer technology, right? So he's doing like the synthesizer, as Shaun was saying earlier, like the sci-fi version of a sort of classical hymn, but I think it often just sounds to me like, everybody hates synthesizers, don't they? And again, sometimes it seems to me like just slightly tasteless. I mean, it makes me think of like Switched On Bach or something like that, Peter, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, exactly what you just said, which is, I think that we've got to take this into account of the time. When you were talking earlier about, all this craziness, the keyboards are all over the place, all these weird sounds and everything. It's like they're caught up in the moment, which is the technology of music is exploding. Now, so you've got all these new sounds, And they are a band who love a new sound. And Keith Emerson's obsessed by using these new sounds. He'll get them in anywhere he can, coupled with an adoration of, classical music and kind of, sort of establishment stuff, really. This is not rock and roll. And then, so you think, oh, we'll put those two together. Naturally, you have a cover of Jerusalem. It's horrible. This is the worst opening of an album. It's horrible. It sounds turgid, kind of dreary. What rock fan wants to listen to an establishment hymn as an opener to an album? It's a really brave or stupid gamble, this. Why would you open an album on with this track? I know they play covers and stuff, but this is just so badly chosen. It's tasteless and it's really patronizing because all I can think of is this is like the Daily Mail. Sorry, Daily Mail people, but it's so Daily Mail, this. I can't bear it. I feel cheated, is what it is, I think. I hate this track. I'd never want to listen to it.
Well, maybe that's why the BBC banned it. Because they thought
It was terrible.
Yeah. You see, now the thing is, I made a note that I was going to criticize this track, more or less in the terms in which I just did. But I'm starting to. I've got a niggling feeling, like from something that you said earlier, Peter, that actually this does work if you think.
Yeah,
this is a concept album, like they're deliberately turning the whole album into an arch by having a human hymn at the beginning and then an AI hymn at the end, so to speak,
right? Yeah,
or whatever. I mean, we don't know what the story is of Karn Evil 9. Who knows? They definitely didn't know. But yeah, so now that if you see it in those terms, it does sort of work. I mean, I don't know. I think, probably like both of you, I'm feeling some ambivalence here. Like, I think it kind of actually sort of works because it is a great tune. But yeah, I think I wouldn't have opened. I don't think I would have opened with the album with it, concept album or no. I mean, what about the second track? I mean, Toccata, right? Which is, I mean, I feel the same really about this, in the sense that I think it's a cover, and it's a very, again, as you were saying, Peter, it's sort of overwrought, isn't it? Quite almost unpleasant to listen to. Yeah. Because he's doing this synthesizer version of a sort of classical piece. I don't mean classical, in the sense of classical from the classical period, but like like a serious music piece.
Yeah.
And actually, if you listen to the original, the Ginastera, it's quite a fairly aggressively modernist piece anyway. I mean, it's all the sort of kind of chromatic atonal weirdness which is in the E.L.P version is already in the orchestral version. So I don't know what they were trying to do. They were trying to just sort of like recreate it with synthesizers. So again, it's almost like I feel like it commits the sin of being an unnecessary cover version again. Yeah. Supposed to be on the cutting edge of musical technology, but not particularly pleasant to listen to, although once again it could fit the theme.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I like, you were saying earlier that Carl Palmer hadn't really contributed much, formally speaking, to this album, but actually I like his contribution here. I think the percussion solo is good, and I love the bit where there's an awful bit with the synthesizer where it's going and it's like, oh my god, and then he starts playing the drums. He comes in with a sort of rock drum, and I think that's cool, that bit. It's actually the nicest bit in the track, I think. But again, that's an acoustic instrument. It's not an electronic instrument or whatever. Anyway, I suppose I've said enough there. Shaun, what are your thoughts on this one?
It's a bit of a chore, personally. I find this. I mean, it's got a sort of that sort of triumphal Doctor Who radiophonic workshop sound, is it? And you can sort of picture John Pertwee and sea devils coming out of a lake or a fish pond or something. I mean, it's pure radiophonics, going on basically.
Mhm.
I don't know. Yeah, Carl Palmer. That going back to that bit, he's playing drum triggers, isn't he? It's the first use of electronic drum triggers, I believe, triggered by his foot pedal, and it's got. It sounds like Pac-Man, doesn't it? Or an old-fashioned, arcade, doesn't it? Those sort of effects. I don't know. Don't know how I feel about that. Certainly groundbreaking. I mean, you can't say anything else. Keith Emerson said that now Tim, you'll know this, but I didn't. Toccata means a composition designed to show off the performer's technique. So that's obviously why.
Actually, I didn't know that, but thanks.
But he had to
I
fly
do
it.
now.
Is this the bit where I get to do my impression? Can I do?
Go for it. It's Sean's impression.
Uh,
Are you doing an impression of Keith Emerson?
he had to get permission from Ginastera, didn't he? To be able to put this on the album. So he had to fly out. I think it was to Geneva.
Again.
So
Switzerland.
Ginastera's there. And he goes, oh, Mr. Emerson. I like what you've done with this track. It's very nice. And so he approved of it. He liked it. And then it got on the album.
I wonder whether he actually said that. I mean, Keith Emerson said he said it,
Yeah.
It's not
Mr. Keith.
So you're doing Manuel from Fawlty Towers. I think it's like the full quote's probably, "You've beautifully captured the essence of my piece. Now can you let me out of this sex dungeon?" Yeah, good. Okay, well, Peter, anything you want to add? Anything?
Yeah, can I hear more about the sex dungeon? No, nothing to add. No, the thing is that this is really very much of its time, isn't it? This is, let's take the classical thing. Let's do that. I'll get the score, we'll turn it into all this, great. Just leave it to me. Lake and Palmer. They sound like a shoe shop, don't they? Lake and Palmer's. They're like at the side going, I don't know what he's doing. He's doing something. And he sorts it all out. And it's like, great, okay. But that's like very much caught up in that whole spirit of the time. And I think that as a second track, bearing in mind this follows Jerusalem, it's like, how brave can you get, really? I mean, this is just so off the wall, different. And the other weird thing about it is this is, pictures at an exhibition, most people know that theme tune. I mean, do something people know. No one has a clue what's going on here. No one walks around going, oh yeah, Ginastera, love him. Emerson, Lake and Palmer have done one of theirs. Cracking tune. I mean, what the hell are they playing at here? I mean, I enjoy the drama of it. I do like the drama of it. I think it's a very dramatic piece, this, very ambitious. It's like you wouldn't sit down and listen to Toccata, and I don't understand why they put two of these tracks in a row before you even get to that, lovely Greg Lakeness, which is about to come up. It took that long to get to it. I don't know. It's just this whole album is the ordering of it. They're really testing your patience, I think.
Maybe that's a good time to go on to the first actual sort of proper track, unless you want to add anything else, Sean.
No, I can't add anything to that, actually.
Well, it sounds like we're all fans of the next track, at least. Still You Turn Me On. Again, I think to kick this off, I think to me it's another lapse of taste. I think the title, because I mean, I think it's a lovely tune. I don't think Greg Lake always wrote great tunes. Like the second side of Works is all his sort of songs, guitar-led songs. They're all romantic ballads, and I find most of them quite poor. Although I don't dislike that album necessarily. But I think so. I think it's a lovely melody and arrangement, and it's a real relief after the first two tracks.
Oh.
But I think that Still You Turn Me On, that sort of Greg sexing up his lady. It's not really, again, to me, it's another lapse of taste. Peter?
The lyrics to here are so weird. I mean, it's a pretty standard song, isn't it? That wah wah guitar as well. Jeez. And whatever it is, bass, I don't know, something put in. Do you want to be an angel? Do you want to be a star? Do you want to play some magic on my guitar? Do you want to be a player? Do you want to be the string? It's like, what the hell? Is this a man lost his mind or something? Um, by the dark lights on your eyes, though your flesh is crystallized, still you turn me on. You still turn me on. Weird.
This is Peter Sinfield uh, does not write the words to this one, right?
No.
I
Doesn't
think,
sound like him.
and you can tell, right? Because whatever you say about Peter Sinfield, he's not this incoherent, is he? When he puts a set of lyrics together. I mean, you didn't get to my favorite bit, which is every day a little sadder, a little madder. Someone get me a ladder.
What the hell is that? Someone get me a ladder. Go on.
He's
Is
an
there
emotional bit and he needs a hand out, doesn't he? He needs a leg up.
is there a word for bathos when it's not actually bathos? Because I think this might be a case of that. Um, yeah, I mean, Sean, do you like this track?
I'll tell you what, I love the tune and I love the way he communicates it, how he performs it.
Hmm.
The lyrics are pretty schmaltzy, aren't they, at best? I mean, they are cheesy, really. He said Greg Lake said he wrote it for the fans. So he said it's not necessarily a love song, but it's about touring and being on the road and the fans sort of spurring him on to keep working, I guess. But so whether it's necessarily meant as I love the ladies, I don't know.
Well, I think there's a bit of a Freudian slip at the end because what he does is he basically admits that the song's crap. If I just read you the last four lines, you see, I really have to tell you that it all gets so intense, and from my experience, it just doesn't seem to make sense.
Hmm.
Well, that's yeah. I mean, he's kind of like yeah.
Have you seen him sing that live though? I mean, I think they stuffed this into a medley, didn't they, live?
Right.
Yeah.
But he's singing it chewing gum. I mean, how do you do that?
Are they allowed to do that?
I mean, health and safety these days.
Yeah.
I don't. I've never heard that because I don't listen to live albums.
Um,
Um,
Well, apart from pictures and exhibition.
yeah, but that's like practically a studio album, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh well, that's. I mean, again, Sean, you've sort of reframed it there a bit for me. I think. I mean, if you literally take him at his word, and assume that this isn't just a failed love song, but actually he's singing about something completely different.
What, like ladders?
Yeah, or I don't know, being on tour or something like that. Otherwise, it's just. But why would how would you know that? I mean, otherwise, it's just you just look at Greg Lake. Like I don't know if you get like a romantic pop star, like someone like rock star like Jim Morrison or someone like that. Very sort of like handsome fella singing about "Come on, baby, light my fire." You feel there's a certain romance to it. But when you see Greg Lake, you think, oh, he's getting excited now. It's not a pleasant experience. But I don't know.
well, Day maybe. I mean, not when he did the Generation Game theme, maybe, but
Well, we'll come on to that in a minute. Now, before we get to the Generation Game, no. Let's talk about. I'm sorry to do this, but it's my job. Let's talk about Benny the Bouncer. Peter, do you want to kick us off on this?
The thing is, I feel two ways about this, which is it's a reasonable tune. I mean, it's okay. It's incredibly throwaway. Anyone could have written it. A 10-year-old could have written it, but it's okay. It's bearable. But it's just like, why, oh, why have they bothered to? I don't understand why they've done this. I can understand Toccata, with its kind of overblownness. I can understand Jerusalem. That makes sense in the kind of E.L.P. world. But this doesn't, does it? This does not make sense. it's like they're preparing us for some darkness next, isn't it? It's like light relief, like an interval. But we expect more from this band, don't we? And I don't know whether that's us looking back and sort of seeing them as a whole. But you don't listen to E.L.P. for this, do you? This isn't why you listen. This is crapness that might occur in some other world, but this is a letdown from them to us, I think. I just don't understand why they're bothering to do this. And who the hell is singing that? It's not that Roy Harper again, is it?
No, I mean it's Greg, isn't it?
Well, it doesn't sound like Greg Lake, but yeah, he does a voice. And then he sings pleasantly. Oh, what a terrible sight. Like that. It suddenly goes all quaint again.
Mm.
No, I can't see the point of this. It's like they put it in to fill a gap, a light piece of entertainment, but I really don't expect it from them. It's the only thing that's totally inexplicable on this album.
This is weird, isn't it? Because like basically we started off saying this is the best E.L.P. album. All we've done is complain so far. I
I
mean,
didn't.
well, no, but we all express some sort of admiration for the album, but it's just I do like this album. I mean, Sean, what do you let's hear your thoughts on Benny.
Well, I think it's one of those novelty songs. See, I think the Sheriff was better. I like that. I wonder whether they're trying to do the Battle of Epping Forest or something. I don't know. On a small, I don't
That
know.
doesn't sound likely. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, small scale. Yeah.
Hmm.
But it was about a real person, wasn't it? A real bouncer, I guess. So they were writing from some
That
kind of.
doesn't justify it.
No, no, it doesn't. I think I read somewhere that Jim Davidson likes this one, which again,
Even worse. That's
Yeah.
even worse.
um, but yeah, and of course you got it's they did Jeremy Bender, didn't they, as well? So they've got sort of a knack for turning out these songs, I guess. It's just a very odd lead in to Carnival 9, I always think. But maybe Peter, you see, they're luring you into you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
False sense of security.
yeah.
What in
Let's
Benny
say.
the Bouncer?
Yeah,
Benny the Bouncer is it's a horrible track, Benny the Bouncer. It's not a nice place to be anyway.
no, no.
Right. Well, look. Well, I love the way Peter says, "Yeah, but that doesn't justify it," as if we're in a court of law or something.
Can I just point one thing out though? One thing that's always confused me, which is this: they're at the Palais de Danse, right? That's where they are, and he's got a cold meat pie. I don't understand. Is that do they? I very much doubt the Palais de Danse would sell cold meat pies. But on the other hand, if he's concealing a cold meat pie, that's like a concealed weapon, isn't it? Basically. So I think that was never brought up in the song.
Yeah. So there's sort of conceptual discontinuity in the theme. That's
Yeah.
your argument.
In those days, they did keep pies and sandwiches past their sell-by dates, so it might have been quite hard, and therefore used as a weapon
Cold as in frozen.
of destruction.
um, well, great. Listen. I'm gonna break with the consensus on this one. I really like this track, and I think it's again. I think it works programmatically. I suppose you're right. This in the sense. I'm allowing myself to be led a little bit by your opinions here. I think, which is the whole point of doing this. I suppose, but like I think that it's. I suppose it doesn't really fit the theme, but I do think it's nice to. They always did, again like the Nice. They always did like a whole range of emotions, didn't they? So you've got the romantic one, the classical cover, on synthesizers. The classical hymn. Yeah. So I think. The prog epic, and then this here you've got the music hall track, haven't you? And I think that this is where they sound most English, I suppose, because this is an English autochthonous English musical style, isn't it? And I think that I think it's just quite a cool track. It reminds me of the Sheriff, which I think is a nice track, and I also like Jeremy Bender. In fact, Jeremy Bender is the only track I like on Tarkus. So keep that in mind when we have our inevitable discussion of Tarkus at some point. So yeah, I think I like the fact that again that they're sort of their tongue is slightly in their cheek, because otherwise it would be all really, grim. This album, I mean, it would be, thematically grim, wouldn't it? Very dense and negative and heavy. So I think and it doesn't outstay its welcome.
No.
Only a couple of minutes, isn't it? So anyway, yeah, there we are. But I suppose there's probably not much else to say about this track.
I think, the 70s was a time for novelty songs, wasn't it, as well? I mean, like, you had Benny Hill, didn't you? You had Ernie and Rick Wakeman. He had, on Criminal Record, he had Breathalyzer Blues, that great classic with Bill. So,
the thing is,
about, wasn't there?
Tim, the thing is that when you say, oh, it's a very dark album, we need a moment of thing. It's like, we don't really. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a dark album. You wouldn't Metallica to suddenly break into, sort of to do something completely different with you. There's nothing wrong with this album being dark. It's, it's tension. This is just a stupid moment. I don't know. It's just pointless, and it's not thematically linked or anything. It's just like a gap filler. Sorry.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's fine. I mean, I saw I watched one of these other YouTube channels the other day where someone was talking about classic album reviews or something, and they said what a terrible track this was, as if it ruined the whole album. And I thought, well, that's a bit much, I mean, if you wait a couple of minutes, it's over.
That's
not a good argument. It's not a good argument, wrong, is it? But then that was the argument that the Ramones used to use. If you don't like this song, we'll be quickly on to the next one.
I mean, who likes George Harrison's song on Sergeant Pepper? I mean, who really likes it?
Yeah, but I know what you mean.
Like it.
Well, apparently John Lennon liked it.
Oh well, it's all right then.
But what's your point there? It
doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't stop it being a classic, does it? I mean, just because you don't have one track on the album, do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Well, do you like Who Done It off Abacab, or do you think that ruins the album? I don't know. I mean,
I'm not a fan of Abacab.
Yeah, but it doesn't ruin the album. Doesn't ruin the album.
Well, my point is, how bad does a sort of filler track have to be to sort of destabilize the whole album? It
doesn't, but that doesn't matter. It shouldn't be there.
Right. Imagine if this got really heated, and we all walked out of the
flames
discussion. Well, all right. Let's get on to like the main topic of discussion tonight, which is
Karn Evil 9.
Karn Evil 9, yeah. It sounds like I'm giving a sermon. Okay, let's move on to the main topic of discussion for the evening. This is a complicated one, isn't it? I mean, I don't know how we're going to discuss this. I think maybe we could just do it sort of go through it a bit at a time. I mean, it's in 3 parts, right? They're called first impression, second impression, third impression. And then the title looks like a postal address or something. Just to complicate things, the first impression is broken into 2 halves. So it's Karn Evil 9, first impression part 1, and Karn Evil 9, first impression part 2. They did that because they had to split it up so that it didn't all fit on one side of an album because there wasn't space for it, right? This is all kind of obvious, but that's why the titling is what it is. But we could sort of, I suppose that gives us a sort of like at least a format for discussion. I mean, there's a sort of, how do we do this? There's an introduction, isn't there? Cold and misty, this first sort of 3 minutes, which doesn't have a separate title, but it's like a prologue to the whole piece. That's interesting, that bit. I think that really works, that bit, as a prologue. And to be honest, it's one of those things where you get to the end of it and then they change time and they go into the sort of the main part of the first impression. And I get a real sense of joy at that point. At the end of that prologue, when they change time and go into the main bit, it's one of those moments where I feel completely aesthetically satisfied. Like,
Yeah.
oh, they're doing something really interesting here, and it's difficult to. So it's a bit ephemeral. These things, aren't they, in sort of art? But like, it's one of those moments where I think, oh, this is why I'm listening to this album.
Yeah.
I think it's. I think already you're clear that this is a Keith Emerson piece, right? Basically, that almost the whole thing is a Keith Emerson piece because it's all very keyboardy. And I think the fact that, and this is a sort of boring technical point, but the fact that Greg Lake's singing all on the tonic, one note, is an indication of how it's not led by the voice, it's led by the keyboard. And then the voice is almost like overlaid on the top of it, almost as if it's like one of those sort of Led Zeppelin tracks where Jimmy Page is just playing some riff and Robert Plant's just singing anything over the top of it. Yeah, and then we go into like the sort of the heart of the track, I think, right, which is the rest of the first impression, which again is split into two parts. Although I've always thought of it as one thing because I heard it on CD, I never heard it on vinyl. So although I think that the first impression part 2 was issued as a single, and I think it might have been on E.L.P. Greatest Hits, which I think I got out of Brentwood Library when I was at college. And I couldn't make head nor tail of it. It was my first experience of E.L.P. I mean, what are your feelings on the first impression, Peter? Do you like this as much as I do?
Can I just say something? I've got to nip off just for a couple of minutes. Can we do Shaun first?
All right. Yes.
I'll be back in a minute.
All right. Yeah. No problem.
Okay.
In this out then. Yeah. I mean, I really love it. I get confused because I think we had it on vinyl and then it's split, isn't it, as you said? So, but it's quite exciting, isn't it? It's there's a sense of expectation about the track, I think, and I quite like it when Keith Emerson's playing organ or piano. I know there's a lot of synth on this as well, but I love his sort of style on that, and I love the. Peter's gone now, but I don't know how you feel about Greg Lake.
I don't know when he's coming. I don't know when he's coming back, but yeah, go on. Sorry, I just to say, I love. I think you're right. I mean, I picked up on that as well. He starts off doing Hammond and piano, doesn't he? But basically, the first part is Hammond organ, I guess, and it's a real light relief, isn't it? After all the synth, it's like, oh, thank God he's off the synth.
That's exactly it. That's what it is, and he's such a good player. But anyway, I mean, how do you feel about Greg Lake as a guitarist? Because I love his soloing at the end.
Yeah,
sort of a bit underrated, would you say? I mean, we know he's a bassist and singer, and
yeah. I mean, thanks for that question.
You're the bass player. Thanks.
Yeah, no. I think it's hello, Peter. I think it's it is an interesting question that because I've never rated Greg Lake as a guitarist, but not because I think he's not a good guitarist. It's just that I don't have a handle on his guitar playing. And I can't really work out. I think he's a very good acoustic player, I have to say. It's not easy to play acoustic guitar, especially in live situations in the way that he does. But as an electric guitarist, I don't really have much of an opinion about Greg Lake. Although, yeah, I suppose you're thinking of the bit where he goes, that bit. That's very nice playing, isn't it? And you're right. This is the first time in any sort of E.L.P. album, I think, where you start to think, oh, some interesting rock guitar is being played here, right? It's actually the first time.
Yeah.
Did you have anything else you wanted to say on that?
You get the first use of the sort of the show theme, don't you? You know, roll up, see the show. You get that. I mean, is it Sinfield, isn't it? Is it Sinfield?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you get this sort of tease of the what's to come, I guess, and then you have to flip the bloody album over, don't you? So
actually, is this Sinfield? Because I think that Sinfield's definitely, it's difficult to know, isn't it? Because Sinfield's definitely writing on part three, the third impression. I don't know whether he's contributing to the lyrics on this first bit. Apparently he might have contributed something. It's difficult to imagine that he didn't contribute anything on this, although they are a bit all over the place. I think the lyrics on this, on the first impression.
Mm.
Again, some of them slightly, again, some lapses in taste. I think
Mm.
when they start talking, he starts singing about a woman having
Mm.
sex with a donkey.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Is that right? I doubt that Pete Sinfield would have allowed that one through.
On the
But
album, he's credited as the third impression. That's where he's actually got a credit, but it puts it as a title for the whole of Carnival 9. It has his name in it, but I think he's only involved in the third.
right. Shaun, did you have anything else to say on the first impression?
Very, very good drumming on it as well. Very good drumming. And going back to Cole Palmer, I haven't mentioned his drum kit, have I?
Go for it.
Drum kit. It's bloody stainless steel. Look, I've got, while we're on the subject of Cole Palmer and his drums, he had this incredible. Now, some people say that British Steel approached him to make this kit.
We're going to. Sorry, this is going to be a new section in the podcast: British industrial history with Shaun Hall.
So this kit, it was actually made by several different companies, but the shells were made by British Steel in stainless steel, and they were weighty. The bass drum alone weighed 90 pounds, which I worked out was near enough 7 stone. So as heavy as a child, basically a fairly robust child. He had the shells engraved. I don't know if you probably all know this. I'm sure everybody knows this. But he'd seen a hunting rifle. I don't know if he collected them, made by Purdy, and of course it was engraved on the handle. And there were various woodland creatures on the rifle. So it inspired him to have a drum kit engraved with woodland creatures. And I looked into this, and I could only really find it. I think there's a peacock and a fox, and there's a farmer on a horse and cart. Now they were specially engraved by a chap called Paul Raven, who was a jewelry maker. So it cost a few bob, and of course this huge kit was supplemented. He had a gong, a xylophone. I think he had a church bell. He had his drum triggers. He had the lot. So it's just incredible, really, the excess of it. I think he had a whole. Well, they had a whole lorry each, didn't they, for their gear when they were touring, didn't they?
Eventually.
Yeah. Well, anyway, he eventually had to sell this kit, or he, downsizing, I guess. And I don't know if you know, Ringo bought it. Ringo Starr bought the kit, bought it for his son Zach. And apparently, he was eventually going to gift it to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Obviously, when Zach was a bit older, went off with, I don't know if Keith Moon had died by then, but he taught him, didn't he? Keith Moon taught Zach Starkey drum.
What a teacher! What a teacher of drums.
Anyway, so he was going to gift it to them, but apparently he couldn't afford the shipping costs because of the bloody weight of this kit. It was humongous. So anyway, eventually sold it to a fan who paid $75,000 for it. So it's in some fan's collection. There is an Indiegogo campaign to buy Cole Palmer's drum kit, and I looked it up, but apparently they've only raised about 400 quid. So if you could dig deep and get Cole Palmer's kit into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, please do. So that's a little bit about Cole Palmer.
We should do some political campaigning on here as well. Yeah, I think I remember. I didn't know most of that, Shaun. Although I did see an episode of Blue Peter about it, I think once.
Yes, yeah, he was. I think I remember seeing that actually back in the day.
I also saw a documentary, I think, about E.L.P, which I don't know if either of you remember, but there's a bit where Cole Palmer talks about this kit because I'm just improvising here because you've brought this back to my mind. Where he talks about that kit as an example of the excess because as you said, they were famously excessive, right? So they had like their surnames. They had three trucks and they had their surnames on the top, so you could only read them from a helicopter. And he talks about that as representative of the excess. And I think there's quite a good anecdote where he says we built this incredibly heavy kit, and then we realised that none of the stages on any of the gigs of our tour would have been able to withstand this weight. So we had to go around reinforcing all the stages. Now that's quite a funny anecdote. He doesn't play it for humour though, which makes me think that he probably wasn't a very humorous man. Carl, I say wasn't. He's the only one who's still with us, actually, isn't he?
Like on his talking about his style for a moment. Apparently, Keith Emerson thought that he played a bit like Buddy Rich's. Buddy Rich, I'm doing a Freudian slip, like Dave Brubeck's drummer, going back to Joe Morello. But
right.
Personally, I think he's much more like Buddy Rich. He's much more about the chops and
the snare, a lot of snare work.
That's much more Buddy Rich sounding to me, and filling every beat, Whereas I think Joe Morello, if you know his style, is a bit more laid back. But there we go. That's my opinion.
Good. I'd like to say something here before we go to Peter. I think that we haven't been very complimentary about E.L.P, have we, in this discussion so far? And I think that distinguishes this from the previous conversations we've had. I suppose we all have some admiration for them, and maybe I do more than you two, but like maybe we can sort of be, fairly frank. I don't like Carl Palmer's drumming at all, and I think that the reason why is because I'm going to be quite upfront about it here. I think technically he's very impressive, but I think that he basically plays in quite an unmusical way. In the same way, I think he's basically not a musician, in the same way that Keith Moon wasn't really a musician. And in the same way, now this is really dodgy territory. In the same way, I think Nico McBrain from Iron Maiden is a technically incredible drummer, but he's basically hasn't got much of a sense of rhythm. So it actually makes Iron Maiden more difficult to listen to for me. I think the previous drummer, Clive Burr, was amazing. And I think when Nico came in, he was like the right fit in terms of personality. But he does this thing, unmusical thing, Nico McBrain, of speeding up all the time. So that when they like Iron Maiden just play songs and they get faster and faster and faster. This is a very unmusical and unprofessional way of doing things. And Carl Palmer does exactly the same thing, even though all of his chops are amazing. Yeah. And I think there's one bit here where it really goes off the rails. Since you brought it up, I mean, I wasn't going to get into it, but since you brought it up, right? The bit where there's a drum solo in the first impression towards the end, where it goes, and then Greg Lake has to come back in just with the drums, and of course, compositionally that works perfectly. But Carl Palmer just massively speeds up, and when poor Greg Lake comes in, he has to start singing much faster. And then, of course, when the band comes in, they all have to slow down. And I think it's one of the weirdest, most unprofessional, unmusical moments on the album. And I do admire his sort of technique, but I don't understand how it's possible to admire drummers that are that unmusical in their. Oh God, I've said it all now. I wasn't going to mention it because it's so negative, But anyway, Peter, what do you like for first impression?
Just a note about Carl Palmer. People who like E.L.P, of course, say, "Oh yeah, Carl Palmer." You never hear drummers talking about Carl Palmer, though. No one ever. Drummers don't name drop him generally. They might know who he is or something, but they don't tend to say, "I want to be like Carl Palmer." Basically, I had a tape copy of this. Like, I mean, tape as in tape to tape. A copy of this, and of course, so from the start, Jerusalem, and it wasn't the first thing I'd heard of E.L.P. And so when Carnival 9 comes in, like you were saying, it's one of those glorious moments of just pure brilliant writing. I love Carnival 9. Impression 1, Part 1 and 2 are fantastic. And I think it's only equaled the impression. I say specifically impression one here because I think it's the first impression is the best one of these. It's only equaled in prog rock or in rock generally by a few other tracks, I think. This is so seamless. The way it runs, despite all the speed ups and things, the way it runs from beginning to end is just fantastic. And without getting into too much detail, I think that there's some wonderful moments in here. Greg Lake sounds incredible. The bass on this is just one, you can hear it really strongly, all those little runs and everything. The mix between Keith Emerson's sort of, the sort of honky tonk, sort of bluesy stuff,
Peter's mentioned the blues.
yeah, he's mentioned it. And his sort of general rock approach is fantastic. Cole Palmer sounds good enough, and I think he just follows it through. But I think that there's some wonderful moment actually when you get to the that second theme comes in, which is the when that comes in, there's some wonderful hi-hat moments.
Yeah.
Really great, really sort of imaginative idea that, and it's something you can only feel. I think that I absolutely love Impression One. I think it's fantastic, and it runs so well, and it does that clever thing that Yes did actually on Close to the Edge as well, which was it introduces a theme in the first part one, which you don't realize has actually sort of been introduced, and then when it comes in with Welcome Back, My Friends, and you've got that in the background, it actually starts repeating itself, and you suddenly realize actually this has already happened, but sort of under a different flag almost. It's like in a different experience, and suddenly you're back in with the donkeys and the blade of grass and all that. I think it's wonderful. The thing is, there's so much music here. It's very hard to discuss this, and I was sort of a bit worried about having to kind of bring this together. It's actually quite hard because there's so much music in this. I can't even deny that first impression is incredibly varied, incredibly well written, but there's so much going on. It's full on the whole way, isn't it? There's no breaks. There's no moments of calm in any of this, but I absolutely love it. And it's one of those moments where you think art has kind of ascended to man. It's like the best art feels like it's untouched. And this is just a phenomenally well written piece, I think, this very first impression. I love it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's sublime, isn't it? Let's
Yeah,
say.
it is.
I can tell that actually things are starting to look up here because actually it seems like for all of us, this actually is where the album really, really takes off. Yeah, you're right. There's a hell of a lot going on, isn't there? It's incredibly complex for rock music. This you sort of almost wonder how they remembered it all, because these are head arrangements, aren't they? They have to memorize them all. And that's not an easy thing to do. But yeah, there's sort of I've put here that they're making music like of four people with only three. It's or as my old friend Rob used to say in Ipswich, it sounds like there's two bands playing at once. Right? And it is very impressive, isn't it? Just a small caveat. Even though we obviously all really feel passionate about this track, is there slightly too much going on there? I mean, is this another example of them being incredibly talented writers, but again, another lapse of taste because it's so out of control, isn't it? I suppose it doesn't really matter. I suppose it's a bit. As you were saying, it's like listening to Metallica. I mean, it's full on all the time, but the thing is actually. No. As long as we can accept that, it doesn't really matter, I suppose.
I think it all makes sense. I think you're right. It's like on the edge of chaos, isn't it? It's just controlled, but that shows the brilliance in the writing. I think is that they've stuck absolutely everything into this. Everything you can imagine that these three could do, but it doesn't break. They bend it to the absolute max, but it doesn't break, I think. And that's, it's just the way they are, isn't it? And Pink Floyd are like the opposite, aren't they? They could play for 10 minutes on almost nothing, whereas this lot stick everything in. But the writing's so exciting and it all works, I think. So no, I think it's getting close to that, but I don't think it breaks. No.
Right.
They said that it was written with one eye on performance. So, I think that comes across. It's I don't know. It's quite a visual. Well, for me, here I go, visual brain. but it's quite a visual piece, and you get into um, the first impression part two, and you've got all this sort of wonderful imagery with welcome back, my friends, and Peter Sinfield's involved in it, but some of the incredible imagery from the lyrics. I don't know. I imagine it being a live piece today with some sort of musical interpretive dance going on or something like that.
Didn't they?
Stars,
You mean like the opening of the Generation game?
yeah, maybe like that, just like that. Maybe
Oh, sure.
Davidson and Roy Chubby Brown, or.
I don't know I don't know who's going to listen to this conversation on YouTube or on the podcast, but I wonder if any of them will know or care who Jim Davidson is. But we haven't got time to go into it. He's a. I mean, where do you begin? A racist, right wing comedian in inverted commas who used to be popular for a while and happens to be friends of sort of old reactionary pop stars. He was a big good friend of Keith Emerson, wasn't he? Anyway, he's difficult to sum up in words, Jim Davidson. So let's not bother. But yeah, brilliant tour. So this is a tour de force. I mean, perhaps it's no accident that they kind of broke up after this album. I mean, what else was then there for them to do? You know what I mean? They took a few years off, and they then came back with Works, which is really not as. It's much more dispersed. It doesn't, it's got some nice moments, but it's perhaps this was really what it was all building up to.
They're all working together on this, aren't they? But obviously, by the time it works, they're all pissed off with each other. And
yeah,
Emerson's.
Do you think they were still in the cinema at that point?
They were in Geneva, weren't they? By then,
what a surprise!
Toblerone.
If you go onto the YouTube on the internet, if you can see Carnival 9 Impression 1, there's actually clips of it round about the time, just the first impression. It sounds phenomenal, and I don't know how they do it because Greg Lake, the singing and the playing underneath are some like Sting. Sometimes you can't quite work out how he does the bass parts and sings. It's amazing. The playing is just incredible, and you get to see the drum kit as well.
I remember here we go. I remember my uncle's best friend Keith. Do you remember Keith? Did you ever meet Keith in Brentwood?
I've got his albums.
Oh, right. Well, I remember Keith, who was a prog fan, saying to me, like, after there was a certain point in the 70s where all of these bands had to basically stop because they couldn't take their music any further. He mentioned The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Relayer, and I can't remember what the other one was. It wasn't this, but he was saying like maybe this is another example of that. Like once you've done that, like where do you go? Where do you go from here, sort of thing. All right, well let's go because we can't be here all night. Let's go on to the second impression. Do we think? What are your feelings on this, Peter? Anything to say?
I think the thing is, after the first impression, I think it's hard to top, and I don't think they ever actually recapture that greatness. I don't think you can on an album actually keep that level up anyway. Who's ever heard an album that's kind of impression one sublime throughout? I don't think it exists. I think what impression two does is it gives them this instrumental moment, doesn't it? Which is essentially Keith Emerson showing his versatility. I think so, in the styles in which he plays, because I've made a little list here. We've got jazzy bebop opener. So it's real like 50s sounding. Then we go into this sort of Puerto Rican. That's the only word I could think for it. Sort of instrumental, which has a sort of unusual.
Sorry, actually, I think it's a steel drum bit. It's Caribbean.
Oh, okay. And then we get this mysterious windy landscape. I've given them titles, you see. Then we go into a jazzy shuffle. And it's like, and then it just suddenly stops because we've got to go into the third impression. But I think really it's like a moment for them to almost jam it up, isn't it? Everyone gets a good go at all the different styles here. I don't know quite what the point of it is within the whole thing, except it builds the volume of the piece of Carnival 9, the amount of it, and you can't go straight into Man of Stone off the back of impression one, so you need a gap. I think it's pretty listenable. This I do like it, and it definitely shows Keith Emerson to be an amazing keyboardist. I think.
Um, yeah, they're again. I think they're rushing a bit. Like it's already a long piece, isn't it? I mean, one of the reasons why I said earlier that this was like the culmination of their careers because this is the longest piece that Keith Emerson certainly had written. You know, had ever been involved in. It's 30 minutes, right? It could almost have been a whole album if they'd. But they needed to get Benny the Bouncer on there, you know, to keep the fans happy. But yeah, so and I think that what was I going to say? Oh, I've blanked. Sorry, but yeah, I think it's you need something in there, don't you? Before the third impression, I think it works quite well as that. Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah, I was going to say they're rushing, they're pushing the tempo. I think partly because of Carl Palmer. I do wonder also whether this is what I was going to say. I wonder whether they'd slowed down and played it at a proper tempo. The piece would have been even longer.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, maybe they could have taken Benny the Bouncer off. There would have been no need for Benny the Bouncer. But yeah, Sean, what are your feelings?
I like it. I like that sort of it's Keith Emerson again. That sort of jazzy piano style is really lovely, and he sort of follows that up on Works, doesn't he? A bit, I think. Anyway, yeah, there's all sorts of stuff. I mean, is it samba or bossa nova in there as well? I mean, then you've got that sort of section where it stops, and there's that sort of eerie percussive and bass sound, isn't there? Yeah, it's now I did read, I don't know if it was Greg Lake or Peter Sinfield, said this section represents the blissful ignorance of the computer takeover. So there you go. It's like humanity sort of idly whiling away the hours, and unbeknown to them, computers were, you
You
know,
know, you know what though, Sean? You know what would have really helped in this concept was if they'd put anything on this album cover. It's useless for
yeah,
for
well,
a band who are putting a magnificent cover on it and claiming, this sort of story of, artificial
yeah.
intelligence taking over. They give you nothing. There's no lyrics. There's no names for these tracks, that give any sense of the story that they then subsequently say, oh, it's man, they're just oblivious to the computers. How on earth are we supposed to take this? They
Well,
don't give you
it's
any
like
clues.
it's like when you go to an art exhibition and look at a pile of bricks and there's no label, and you think, oh, what,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, it's sort of, but I think that that's open to interpretation. They're claiming a story on this. They're
yeah.
telling you what it is, but they're not telling you on the album cover. They're telling you 20 years later, on I don't know, on the Late Show or whatever.
Perhaps they didn't know. Perhaps they just made it all up and thought about something
They probably
after.
meant it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, you're probably right. Maybe it didn't matter that much to them. Although, like these sort of bands, if you hear them talking about their work, they'll start going, "Oh yeah, so what we wanted to do here was," and they suddenly get all verbose, But perhaps at the time they didn't have much of an idea what was going on. But yeah, anyway, and there's not much to say about this so much conceptually, is there? Because it's instrumental.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. I think it works. It's a breather, isn't it, before the final bit? And as you said, Peter, like you need something.
Yeah.
I do slightly miss. I've always had this feeling when I listen to it that I slightly miss a beautiful tune in the middle, like when it goes completely quiet and then it sort of stops. All the sort of jazzy stuff, and then Keith Emerson comes in with a sort of piano part. Da, 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 da. I think it like there's often moments in their work, like in Trilogy, in the middle part of the Endless Enigma, where the keyboard melodies, the piano melodies are so beautiful. I sometimes wish that I think this could have been even better if he'd actually written a nice tune in the middle. But I think as a sort of interlude, since it is an interlude, this bit, it probably doesn't matter. And as you say, I think the jazzy bits at the beginning and the end are kind of fun, aren't they? There's a lot of nice playing in there. And I think that between the interplay of the piano and Carl Palmer, it was nice at the beginning and the end. Sean, you want to say something?
I just to digress, just for a small moment. If it came to a fight, who would win, Keith Emerson or Rick Wakeman?
Well, there's only one way to find out.
Do you mean a keyboard fight?
Well, if there was a keyboard fight, who would win? I mean, who do you like?
That's a really hard one.
Who do you prefer if your life
Well,
depended on it?
I think I assume this is the question for me. I don't know. No, I think I think I'd go with Rick,
Yeah.
but they're very different, aren't they? I mean, I think Keith Emerson is sort of more inventive in a way, but much scrappier. So he's like a bit like Steve Howe, you know, sort of more like an interesting player and an interesting writer, but he's all over the place. I mean, sometimes he sort of has like plays things wrong and stuff. Um, so yeah, they're probably not comparable, really. What do you think?
Well, no, it's just that there were occasions when I was listening back to this that especially when he's on piano, he reminds me a bit of Rick Wakeman. So
Right.
that's very Rick-like. But yeah, I mean Keith Emerson. I mean, of course, the tragedy wasn't it that he had something wrong with his hands, didn't he? He sort of was it arthritis? But
Yeah.
didn't stop him shooting himself, though, did it?
Oh God.
Yeah.
I think they used to give him, yeah, they used to give him B12 shots.
Oh God.
Um, uh,
Yeah.
like because he had these problems with his hands. Was that why let's not get into this. Was that why he took his life? He
Yeah.
shot himself?
Yeah. He was depressed.
Couldn't play anymore. Well, that is a shame, isn't it? Um, but
On that.
um, on that morbid note, I think we have some area of agreement here. Let's move to the third impression.
Yeah.
And I think this is where it gets the thematic part becomes clearest, I think.
Mm.
May I go into my pedantry
Go for
corner?
it.
I think you should.
Um, I think the key moment, and I noted it down, is at 2:23 of the third impression, 2 minutes 23. There's a line where he says, he sings, "Load your program, I am yourself." And it's sort of distorted because at this point, because it's about the sort of relation between artificial intelligence and human intelligence, isn't it? Right, which is a very contemporary theme, by the way.
Mm.
That line, which presumably is by Peter Sinfield, I think sums up the whole piece in a way. And I think that I wonder if it's a reference, here we go, to Rambo, not the not the Sylvester Stallone film. Arthur Rimbaud, the French, symbolist poet, because he's got a famous line. I actually got the quote here. Hold on. He wrote in a letter to somebody. These sort of pretentious letters that intellectuals write, and then like people remember the quotes from the letters. There's a famous thing where he says, "Je ai un autre," I is another, right? And this is sort of generally considered to be like the sort of starting point, like a first moment or to prefigure the structuralist revolution in philosophy, which came afterwards, which is where you're not really clear whether the subject ends and the social structure begins, so to speak, and that sort of thing. And in fact, I've got the full quote here, which I can read if you like. It says, I is another, it says in English. It sounds like just patois, doesn't it, in English? We say it like that.
Yeah, Ali G. Yeah.
Ali G. If the brass wakes the trumpet, it's not its fault. That's obvious to me. I witness the unfolding of my own thought. I watch it. I hear it. I make a stroke with the bow. The symphony begins in the depths or springs with a bound onto the stage. If the old imbeciles hadn't discovered only the false significance of self, we wouldn't have to now sweep away those millions of skeletons which have been piling up the products of their one-eyed intellect since time immemorial and claiming themselves to be their authors. So, like, I think this is like, I wonder if there's an echo here in Peter Sinfield's lyrics. It's like, where do you end and I begin, sort of thing. Yeah. And of course, traditionally, that's supposed to be like a structuralist thing. But of course, today it's given a new twist by the artificial intelligence, human intelligence division. Yeah. Which no one can really get clear, you know. So more Tim's pedantry corner. Exactly. I mentioned it because that I think that's the concept of the whole album, if there is a concept, uh, where they sort of like meld into one thing. Actually, the tune of that, I think is, I think this is E.L.P. being at their most musically avant-garde, because I think that bit reminds me of early, it reminds me of minimalism. At that time, I think there's the way that they and then they have a pedal underneath it. That reminds me of Steve Reich or something like that. I think this is very like they're going into the area of contemporary classical music there, which actually I think is more interesting, paradoxically, than the Ginastera cover. So I think what I mean is like they're more interesting when they're not trying to be interesting than when they're actually just writing, like being genuinely creative. That's sort of the best thing I can say about E.L.P. But what do you think? Peter, do you like this part?
Well, I mean, as I said before, impression one for me is just sublime. Impression two sort of is okay, I feel like I have to sort of split my comments into two parts here, which is the music and the theme. I'm not particularly bought over by the music here, really. It sounds a bit tired in places, I feel like. It's like they're trying to write a hymn again, which I find again a little bit like patronizing is not the word, but it's like they're taking me for granted. I want something just more exciting than this ending. It's got the horns and that kind of thing Shaun was talking about. It's like the theme tune for, the new army and all that. It's a bit corny, but I don't think at the time maybe it was corny. I think now it might sound a bit like that, just because things have moved on so much. So I'm not bowled over by the music. I love the ending. I think it's a really inventive ending, which is Keith Emerson plays some sort of atonal, part on the keys, and then they do this tape loop at the end, and they take it over and over, and it gets so fast to the point where it vanishes, doesn't it, into nothing. I love that, which brings me on to the theme, which is it's supposed to be an optimistic ending, this, isn't it? Which is, oh, we've won, we've killed the machines, isn't everything great? And looking at the lyrics, you'd think that, but actually, it's not really, is it? Because at the end, you get this the computer kind of wins, doesn't it? Because it finishes the album. There's this, it swims between the speakers, great stereo thing, but it's like there's no destruction. It's like actually, no, this is the future, whether or not we've won some battle. It reminds me of like Terminator or something, but so there is that kind of darker ending. But I also think that this third impression makes you question everything else, because it's so sort of obvious, this ending, isn't it? It's like, yeah, the human race, we've battled, great. But then you think, what's all that stuff about the show then? Well, whose show? What was that? You know, is it like what was the first impression then? What show? And I get in my head, I think, is this the machine saying, gather, come round humans, come and see the show, distract them, all this stuff, because it's full of really like horrible, gaudy kind of stuff that draws people in, really sort of gritty stuff, isn't it? And you think, oh yeah, they'll love this, the humans, but you only realize that in retrospect. You think, oh, is that what that was the show? I just suddenly think the whole thing, you're wondering what it all means then. I don't know whether they've got a clear idea, because it's a bit odd, isn't it? Welcome back to the, sorry, welcome back, my friends, to the show that their friends can't be meaningless. I mean, you wouldn't come up with that, would you? There's a whole idea of this, the show, a bit like in Passion Play. There's something similar, isn't it, where people go and view things, and then you think, well, why did they do that? But there was an obvious reason, but it's never really explained. But no, for me, it's not a great ending. I don't think it is a great ending, really, I have to say.
I think that if you are expecting a big ending, because what you expect aesthetically is that the ending is bigger than the beginning, and certainly bigger than the middle, in a piece like this. But of course, it's almost impossible for them to top the first part. I think this works more or less okay as an ending. I like the sort of hymnal thing. My only comment, and then I'll let you come in, Shaun, is that I think the track is about 4 minutes too long. Because I think that bit where they go, all seems to work for me until they go into the minor key, da 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 I think, well, where are they taking this? And it's like they're doing a long coda, because then in the end they come back to the sort of the happy theme, as you said. But I don't think that's necessary. That bit. I think they've already said everything they need to say. So I think from a composition perspective, I think it could have been. And so again, I'm coming back to my normal theme, my sort of structural theme. Like, why don't they just cut that bit out? They could have fitted this on one side of the album. We could have had Tiger in the spotlight, in the first part, and but I think those things from the audience's perspective are important, because it's like, are you expecting a big ending, and it sort of works, but then they run it on too long. So that's like, I don't find that an aesthetic failure, basically. Right. But anyway, we've said a hell of a lot. Shaun, do you want to final thoughts on this track?
I'm always struck that, thank God, there isn't a fourth impression.
I think that's a very good point.
No, I mean, we haven't mentioned the Dalek voices, have we?
No.
Radiophonics again, and there's there's a bit too much for me of the old sort of Flash Gordon Space March kind of themes again, and I could imagine Brian Blessed popping up, Gordon, this sort of thing, but. Yeah, I mean, I like it, and the ending of it reminds me of those sort of 70s sci-fi films. I mean, there's one called Silent Running, isn't there, where they end on a sort of somber note almost, or it's that sort of 70s thing, isn't it? It's slightly dystopia. It doesn't, But anyway, yeah, it's fine. I mean, I think it's a great ending with that sort of computer loop sort of idea.
Yeah, I think that's really futuristic for the time, tape loops, but to such a exciting degree as well, isn't it? And it really throws the whole thing into kind of dispute, doesn't it? Which is, well, what do they mean? Because it says earlier, doesn't it? Rejoice, glory is ours, but it doesn't end like that at all.
Yeah. Well, it's 29 minutes, 37 seconds long, so they could have made it 25 minutes long. I think, but that's great. I haven't mentioned Steve this episode.
You have now.
Can I just mention, Steve gave a great quote. He's not particularly an E.L.P. fan, but he likes Trilogy. He likes Greg Lake, and he sort of said this album would have been a lot better if they'd have locked Keith Emerson up in the broom cupboard. I don't know, but
you mean like in the cinema?
Yes.
Yeah.
The toilets.
The toilets.
You could have cracked on, but anyway, no.
That might be a good note to end on, I suppose. I hope that people don't feel that we've been too negative about E.L.P, because I think we all are sort of fans in a way. There's no need for me to qualify any of this. It's fine. We say we bloody like. I was thinking that maybe let's leave it there. I was wondering whether it's a bit, there's a sort of like, could be a pessimistic ending, because people were generally starting to feel a bit pessimistic at that point in British public life, late sort of 70s. So I wonder whether that's a part of it. I
think, to be honest, the real reason is the technology. There's so many things that E.L.P. do and bands do generally at that time. It's because it's there. There's suddenly something you can do. You get that with Radiohead as well, don't you? Which is they discover a toy.
Yeah.
So when you can suddenly do a tape loop, that's exciting. How could they possibly leave that off the album? What do you mean? You can make it go as fast as it can. Bloody hell, put that in. I mean, it's like, that's exciting, isn't it? So it's part of the times, I think.
So it's a maximalist approach.
Yeah.
All right, brilliant. Well, look, I think we should probably leave it there, because we were supposed to do a short session today, but I mean, it hasn't worked.
No.
I would like to say to anybody who has waded through all of this, if there are any of you, please feel free to comment, like, and subscribe. And we should be meeting in I suppose, a couple of weeks to do the next one of these, for what it's worth. And I won't tell you what album it's going to be yet, because we haven't decided. And thanks to both of you for being here. And we'll see you all next time. Thanks a lot.